Hello, I'm Judy Stiles. Thank you for joining us this week on Newsmakers. Well, the Missouri Southern Campus encompasses about 300 more acres, but there's a special corner of that acreage that is being preserved for the future. Joining me today to discuss that and the prairie that we have at Missouri Southern, starting off our program, Kip Heth and Randy Haas. Thank you both for being here today.
You're welcome. Thank you, Judy.
We're talking about a native tallgrass prairie, and for our
Yes.
viewers, they might wonder, well, is this something really unique to our region?
Randy, you get
Let
that.
Randy start.
Very unique. Historically, the state of Missouri was covered probably about a third of it with eastern tallgrass prairie. Now there's less than 1/2 of 1% left statewide. So every little remaining piece is actually a jewel, and it's great to have that. The university here has a little small segment of that on hand in the property.
So, of course, at the university, you're with the biology department. This has really tied into educational opportunities in the biology department.
I've been here 15 years, and I'm a stream ecologist by training, and so this is my amateur side, what we're doing here. But I started teaching a freshman biology class for the majors, and I was looking for a project area in which we could do that wouldn't take a lot of transportation. But, on the prairie. We have the prairie setting itself with the flowers and the insects primarily, as well as birds. But we also have, in my area, a wetland in back of the prairie, which was created artificially but works really well, and it makes a great place for the students to use their studies. And it's not just my class that uses it. Dr. Willand has courses out there. Dr. Plucinski teaches classes out there. Entomology, the insect people use it as well, and it's just across the street.
So to
not
have this
miles
on
away.
the campus at Missouri Southern really
Yes.
makes it special for you. Well, for our viewers, we have a map, I believe, through PowerPoint. I'd like to take a look at that to help people visualize where it's at. Basically, we're talking about the northeast corner where Newman and Duquesne roads meet.
Yes.
And
It's about 40 acres of prairie. So it's a quarter of a quarter section of land. And it is what makes it unique. You know, when it's mowed, it doesn't look much like a prairie. But when you start to let it grow, you see it's not just tall fescue grass like you see in every pasture around here. It has dozens of species of grasses.
Well, even some of the more diverse prairies can have 300, 400, 500 different species of grasses, forbs, sedges, rushes. I mean, just a very extremely diverse ecosystem.
now, I know you had a presentation to the Board of Governors recently where they agreed to help preserve this property.
Yes, and I should recognize some people right off the bat. Dr. Marble and his administration, Bob Harrington in maintenance, the Board of Trustees, as well as biologists who are retired or emeritus like Dr. Messick and Dr. Bay worked for years on this piece of property. And if it wasn't for them, we probably wouldn't have gotten an agreement with the Board of Trustees.
So the board has said we're going to guarantee that part of that land will remain in its natural state.
Yes, the north part of the property will not be touched. What we will manage, what's really different is we will manage the rest of the property. Randy maybe can speak to this later, as it's a prairie. And so our mowing regimes and things like this will be promoting the diversity of the plants and animals on the prairie.
So until the university decides to do something with the rest of that property, the whole area is going to be able to be preserved.
That's different.
To have the commitment. Randy, with that type of property within the city limits of Joplin, basically, it's kind of unique as well.
Very unique. It makes it a little bit challenging because historically, native prairie had these large grasslands, had large herds of bison, other herbivores, elk, maybe antelope, deer, would go through and periodically graze them down. And if you had a herd of them, several 100,000, maybe even 1 million bison go through, I mean, they'll just wipe it down to the ground, but then they wouldn't be back for several years. So you'd have this periodical disturbance going on a prairie. Well, now that doesn't happen. You don't have these large herds of bison, these ungulates coming through. So we have to artificially create some disturbance out there, and that's where the haying comes in. Burning, the Native Americans did burning once in a while. They knew that, if you burned an area of the prairie, the native grassland, these herbivores would come in following that because you get all this fresh, succulent green grass coming in there. So they knew that these animals that they hunted would come into those areas, and so they'd kind of entice them into there so they could hunt
fresh
them.
ground to eat on.
Right. And so now, I mean, we still do prescribe burning on prairies. But when you're within the city limits of any town, you've got homes around there. I mean, you've got a very tight system. Actually, I'm not even sure we could probably conduct a prescribed burn without putting smoke. I mean, you got smoke management, you got fire management, you got to worry about it getting away, and so I'm not even sure that's going to be an option as far as future management. But the haying will. And we're going to have to do some kind of disturbance to it. If you don't do anything with it, the dead grasses, the forbs, and everything just keeps piling up over consecutive years, and then it just becomes a little bit more difficult to sustain it. So if you get the woody stuff coming in there, if you don't do anything with it, the woody trees, and then there's been some work done out here already as far as containing some of the persimmons, sassafras, and some things that
those are considered kind of invasive species
well,
for the
those
prairie.
are natural, but they would normally be burned off by fire. Okay. But we do have invasives too, and if you want to talk about that, we have plants you should never put around your house. Japanese honeysuckle. It is such a bugger
and
to
it
control.
gets on these lands.
Oh, it gets everywhere. We have a mess in the back with Japanese honeysuckle. Maybe we should try goats or something. But we have to pull it and spray. An introduced pear, Bartlett's pear, not supposed to reproduce, but it does. It grows heavily in the back, and so we have to cut it at base level and spray the stems on that. The red cedar is native. It's a great tree, but the birds scatter the seeds everywhere, and without the fire, the cedars, you just notice it in all pastures, will come up heavily. So it's an annual event to cut cedars.
To control that area. Now, some of our viewers might be curious, how do you determine or define this area as a native tallgrass prairie? I mean, there's a lot of fields around the region. How is that determination made?
Well, I've been involved with native prairie for my whole career since I got out of college, which is over 35 years. And so I can basically go down a road and I can look at a site and just look at it from a road and basically tell it's got some native vegetation. One of the characteristics of a native prairie is what's called mima mounds. If you look out over a field, especially if it's been hayed or close mowed or whatever, you'll see these little gentle mounds over the field. And there's still some discrepancy as to what created those. The latest theory is that they may have been prehistoric gophers, large gophers that may have created these. They don't really know for sure, but that is a very good characteristic of a native prairie. Plus just the plant diversity. You'll see all these wildflowers. I think we'll got
some of those to show, right?
Right. I mean, from very early spring through the summer, through the fall, you'll have this diverse number of plant species, not only grasses and sedges and rushes, but these wildflowers, or forbs, what we refer to them as, that'll be blooming throughout the season. They're just gorgeous.
Right. So as we're recording this program, it's peak blooming season for the prairie.
Yes.
You're able to see that.
For the spring season. But as Randy said, there will be a progression of flowers almost to December.
As
long as things can grow, they're out there growing.
Even after the first frost, there'll be some flowers out there and stuff. So.
Well, I know you're able to use the facilities or the land actually for your students, and we had a student, one of our students from television, shoot some video, and if we have that video, let people take a look at that. That hands-on opportunity for the students to be able to go out there and explore the prairie is an opportunity. Let's discuss what we're seeing as we look at the video.
Yes. Well, Dr. Messick in 1999 had the campus set apart the very back, and that was that MSSC prairie little video. And this is my Bio 111 class. We were out there looking at flowers, and there's a wetland back there too, and we've been keeping track of frogs out in the
See
wetland.
what the life is
two
like.
species of frogs, but our project this year was just to start collecting in January aquatic samples and collect all the way to April and just watch the changes in the aquatic life. And these organisms don't mind drought, they don't mind it freezing solid. They've evolved for millions of years to these conditions. It's just interesting.
So the
Piece of
students are
biology.
getting this
Oh,
hands-on
I think
with
they're cutting some trees.
Okay.
Right, he's got a
So here's
clipper
where you're
and
getting
he's
rid of
cutting the
some of
little
those
red cedar trees right there for the television camera.
So
Oh, that was a pear, a Bradford pear
I was gonna say it wasn't
that was cut.
So the students are helping you with that hands-on. Here's somebody who's actually
Here's our
walking through the
wetland out
aquatic wetland.
We have some aquatic birds that are really interesting. My students wouldn't believe me about snipe. They thought they were a mythical creature, but we had snipe fly up the day we were out there. And we have a few other oddballs like LeConte sparrows. And yesterday I saw an upland sandpiper.
Awesome.
Haven't seen one of those in years,
Awesome.
which was really neat.
They have the equipment here that they're using as you talk
Right,
about
he's
through
got
the sampling.
they've got an oxygen meter and other things that they're sampling as well. But we were taking invertebrate samples out there. They have a pH meter.
So if someone drives by on the road, they don't realize that this wetland's
No,
even
you
out there.
never
You don't
see
see it.
it.
It's
You
off
can
to the
see it
side.
on the map, but not from the road.
And these little ephemeral pools or wetlands are very important from a lot of species of frogs and amphibians and toads, because if it's not a permanent water source, these smaller species will have time to go through the reproductive cycle, have lay eggs, become tadpoles, and then go into a dormant period. If it's permanent water, then you get some of the bigger frogs in there, and then these smaller species don't have a chance really to reproduce and survive. So these little small ephemeral temporary pools are very, very important.
And can you help monitor? We hear a lot about the drought affecting the region and so forth. You can monitor that by going out there and look at the wetlands.
Yes, we keep record. Oh, there's our prairie crayfish. This is a prairie specialist. The adults live deep in burrows, and the juveniles are all in the water. And of course, they get eaten by many things, but a lot of them will survive, and they'll create burrows. And if you pay attention on campus, you'll see crawdad burrows everywhere on our campus.
And people don't notice this.
Not on the lawn in front of the
Right.
buildings, but
Only in the native
The native
areas.
areas of
Right.
campus, right.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Undisturbed sites and stuff. So, and those are real important. They aerate the soil. They help percolate some of the water through the soil. There is a crayfish frog that actually uses the burrows of the
So the species intertwine, they're really
Exactly.
tying together as you're out there. And you mentioned the birds, so the birds are drawn to this type of wetland to be able to, you know.
right, they feed on the invertebrates in this particular. The snipe especially feed on these small crustaceans.
And that's one of the things that makes a native prairie, so important, is because you can have this tremendous together. All the species are together and stuff. It's just a very, very diverse, unique ecosystem and stuff. And it's just phenomenal. I think there's more that we don't know than we do. To be honest with
So
you.
you're still exploring as you go along, finding
Yeah,
things out.
I'm an amateur. I'm still learning a lot about
We're all
this stuff.
learning.
Trying that together. So I know, Randy, you work with the Department of Conservation. You're interested in preserving statewide. This is a real kind of, would you say, kind of a gem to have this in Southwest
Oh
Missouri in
yes,
this area.
exactly. And even if it's a small tract of native prairie, I always tell people that this is very significant. Cherish it and respect it, and just try to enjoy it as much as you can.
Now you have something with you on the set. I'm curious.
Yeah, and this is from this is a seed actually from it's called porcupine grass. That's actually some out here on the prairie in the drawdown there, but it looks like a quill from a porcupine if you look at it, and I don't think you're going to be able to see it real close and stuff, but it's adapted. Once the seeds fall out of the grass or the plant, they fall to the ground, and as these stems
kind of
dry,
spears the ground.
and as they dry,
Yeah.
they kind of corkscrew themselves into the ground
okay.
and seed themselves and stuff. So I mean, it's just very adapted to the sites out there on native prairie. But that's the only places you'll find it is on native prairie. So.
So when you look at what's out there, there's a lot of things. This is the only place you can see it. You're not
Yes,
going to be
this
able to
is
go
the
elsewhere.
only place you're going to find it.
Find
Some of
that.
these things it's very easy to overlook too. You got to really look at them closely to see that. And even this one, you wouldn't notice unless you know what you're looking for.
Yeah.
So
And that's where you come in, is teaching the students what to look for.
Yes, yeah. And this is so different that you can build a restored prairie, but it will only have a handful of species that will dominate it. It won't have these specialty grasses. It won't have these broadleaf flowering plants, especially the bean family, that are so important. You can't buy bags of seed
Right, you're not
for
gonna-
all of these things. And so some of our state parks have restored prairie, but they're nothing really, when you look closely, like a native prairie.
The diversity that you have here
yeah,
on
and the
campus.
native prairies have evolved for 10,000 years or whatever, and so you've got the macroinvertebrates or microvertebrates, all the bacteria, and the soil insects, the above ground insects, the bees, the grasshoppers. I mean, katydids, everything, birds, it's such a unique intertwined ecosystem. It's just that's what makes it so phenomenal.
That's great. Well, I know we have some others from your department, biology department. I'd like to invite them, and we'll take a break and invite them to come up and share some, I guess, hands-on looking at some of the items that we find on the prairie. So, but I'd like to thank both of you for being with me on this portion of the
Thank you,
program.
Judy.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Stay tuned. We'll be back with more right after this.
At Missouri Southern, we believe achieving a university education should be possible for everyone. That is why we are working hard to make earning a university education accessible and always an excellent value. As a graduate of Missouri Southern, you should expect to reach your career goals. Take a look at our graduates in health sciences, teacher education, business, or biology. Their success can be yours. Come check out Missouri Southern, apply for admission, and see where your academic career can take you.
Welcome back to Newsmakers. We're finding out more about the Missouri Southern Prairie, and joining me on this segment of the program, Jason Willand and Karen Plucinski. Thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you, Judy.
Thanks for having me.
Being in the biology department, I'm sure that as we heard in the first part of the program, this is a great opportunity for our students at Missouri Southern to see hands-on what's on the prairie.
It is. We have a number of courses. I know Kip had, I think, previously mentioned some of the courses that students can go on the prairie, you know, and get an idea of what's out there. And some of the courses are very specific to some group of organisms. So I teach taxonomy of flowering plants. So take the students out there at the very end of the spring semester, finally get to see some of the things, that are actually flowering. So we actually can talk about it while during most of the semester they see these as pressed specimens for the herbarium. Not very exciting, you know, dried up, crispy specimens that have been there for a very long time. So it's completely different, and the look on their face is very, I don't know, it's a really good feeling because they could see what it looks like in full bloom after a whole semester of talking about these families, talking about these different species. So I really enjoy taking them out, and not just on our prairie, but we've got the marsh and the pond in the back as well. So we've got a couple of areas that are right on campus that we can show them plants or insects, whatever it might be.
So it's nice to have this undeveloped type land on Missouri Southern's property to be able to work together.
Right.
And I imagine when you see, like the flowers in front of us, those are just the tips of the plant, but they can see the whole plant and how it ties together in different environments while they're out there.
Right, and one of the things I tell them, that I try to point out, like these are the indicator species. These are species that if you see these, you know that you have native habitat. So prairie, forest, wetland, whatever it might be. But in the case of the prairie, we have a few here with us that if you see these, you know that you have an indicator of undisturbed prairie habitat versus, we've talked, Kip had talked a little bit about, restored prairie, where you might get, there's things that are very common across the board. So things like,
just tell me a little bit some of what we have here, right?
This time of the year, probably one of the most showy species that I think that we have out there, and actually this year we have quite a show of these. This is Indian paintbrush, and this is actually a very common wildflower as you go west, but here in the Midwest, I believe this might be one of only a few species, and maybe this may be, this one particular species may be the only one that you would find in native prairie species.
So it really has that unique look that you can identify, say that's from the prairie, and putting that together. So, and the colors are so diverse. When you look at that, you've got the purples and the whites and the oranges, and really bring the life of the prairie out with those blooms.
And what's nice this time of the year, with the grasses still being short, a lot of these forbs, even though they're short, the color is everywhere. So everything catches your eye. Every little white or yellow or pink or purple, any color is going to stand out. And so you can immediately, you're drawn to it. So it's one of the things during, Kip had mentioned that, there's this progression during the season, but typically, you get a lot of maybe the same colors throughout the growing season, but all of this, the species will change. You'll have those that you'll only find in the spring, some maybe in the summer, and then those very end of the growing season.
So the different seasons throughout the flowering as well.
Right.
Well, Karen, tell me about your interest and how that ties into the prairie. What's your area of focus?
Sure. Well, I teach some of the general courses, general biology for non-majors, as well as some of the more specialized courses that I typically have students their junior and senior year. This would be general ecology and conservation biology. And some of the things that I do with my students is bring them out there to get hands-on field research. It's wonderful to have a patch of native landscape that literally is, a quarter of a mile from the Reynolds Hall, which is a science building. That's fairly unusual. I bring students out there to do labs on pollination ecology. Jason was talking about the flowers and some of the ones that we have that are more unique to pristine habitat, prairie habitat. But really, the general public is so uneducated about just basic biology. The role of a flower is primarily pollination or reproduction. And the showy colors and the scents and even the shape of the flower is important in determining what pollinators are attracted. The insects see in different wavelengths, and with the advent of butterfly gardening, anyone who enjoys that probably knows what species are more important. Yeah, exactly. So it's important for showing biological processes as well as broader conservation issues. The hive collapse that the honeybees have been experiencing. People may say, why should this matter to us? But the fact is, most of our agricultural crops, foods, that is, fruits and vegetables, are derived from plants that were pollinated by honeybees. And I also like the fact that we have it so close for demonstrating that you can really talk about conservation at several scales. You can talk about conservation at the local level. When you say conservation, people think primarily the layperson of like tropical rainforests.
Right, we think of the endangered species and things there. Right?
Exactly. They're not aware that there are some important and in many cases rare species here close to home.
Right in your own backyard.
So that's important. I'm teaching general biology this semester, and I was just talking about the prairie. And towards the end of the semester, we focus on loss of biodiversity and conservation issues, and it's also particularly good for demonstrating that some of these issues are right outside our back door.
That they're right here in Joplin and you can see them and so forth. Now behind you, you also have some grasses, and I don't necessarily have to reach around and grab them, but during the summertime, and we see the grass is starting to grow taller on prairies. A lot of people have images of that tall grass that we're looking at.
So the three regions of the Great Plains basically were named after the height of the grasses. So as you go from the rain shadow of the Rocky Mountains, you have very little precipitation. So you have what we call short grass prairie. Then you move into like a mixed grass, then into the tall grass as you get into our
further
region.
east you go, the further taller it gets.
Yeah, so you have more precipitation. So some of the very showy grasses that you would see that were very characteristic of the tall grass prairie would be things like big blue stem, Indian grass, switchgrass. These are three very large grasses that tend to be kind of dominants or co-dominants. And then little blue stem would be considered a dominant as well, but it typically, based on its, as the name applies, it's shorter in stature, but depending upon the soil, it may be the dominant because it's just too dry for some of the other grasses. So you typically get those four, like, you know, if you were looking at like the big four of any prairie, whether you have a native or one that you would try to restore, you try to get those grasses established. And as the season progresses, they get kind of to their growing peak, and they provide a lot of cover for animals, for nesting birds. So they provide a lot of shelter, and not just during the growing season, but you know, after the growing season, if you have into the winter when grasses and everything else kind of
they kind of brown up and die.
Right. So they're still creating structure for a prairie. So they're creating areas that are going to provide some kind of cover for those birds that are not going to necessarily leave for the winter, migrate for the winter, or small mammals that are going to be active during the winter.
So they talked earlier about burrowing under, they can burrow in the grass and
right,
be protected.
And,
many
right,
creatures.
Maybe escape, you know, or hide from predators. So there is, we think of a forest, you know, trees creating the structure. Well, in the prairie, the grasses would replace trees as kind of the main structural plant or structural unit. And then all the other the wildflowers, you know, they would kind of fill in and create, you know, what we would call kind of our diversity. So they basically fill in all these other little areas, you know, in between the grasses. So everything, you know, has its own little spacing and so forth. Yeah.
Tying it all together. Well, I know, you know, driving to and from the Missouri Southern campus, sometimes I see a hawk on the telephone pole out there, you know, so you've got the birds interacting with probably the smaller creatures that are on the prairie.
Right, everything's, you know, running around, you know, just doing their own business. We have our, you know, we're doing our thing and they're going about their business.
Tying that together. Well, tell me about how you're seeing this benefiting the students. You have graduates who then want to go on and work in conservation. They want to work in, you know, as botanists and so forth. So they're able to get this hands-on experience that benefits them in their careers?
My hope always, you know, is not just, you know, from classes that they're taking away, but that they're able to do some kind of independent research project or maybe an honors project, something like that, to where, you know, if they're using the prairie, they're actually in that system every day. The only way, and from my experience, to learn and to become an expert, you know, or even really even competent in areas, you really have to become a part of it. You have to study it every day. You know, you have to be able to identify this little minute plant from the very common, you know, or whether if it's insects or birds, you know, whatever the group is that you're working on, you have to be in that system with them, and you have to really be able to know, you know, get used to all their little nuances from, you know, if it's a bird, you know, when are they coming into nest, to when are they fledging at the end of the season, you know, when is this plant flowering, when is it going to go to seed, and then, you know, just across the board. So a pristine, untouched prairie really gives students that opportunity, because they, you know, I've pointed these flowers several times, but, you know, they wouldn't see these if they were working in a restored prairie, you know,
they're able to
do a
see
study.
it firsthand,
right?
And so forth.
So they may hear about these, but they would never actually see them.
And Karen, even for the, like I say, beginning biology students, that appreciation of what's out there, you know, helps them in their careers down the road as well.
Yeah, certainly. And I'm teaching general biology for the first time in several years. My eyes are kind of opened up to the fact that the average person doesn't think about these issues. And I was just explaining in class how some biologists estimate that over 50% of the species on the planet are going to be driven to extinction, largely by us in this next century. And so these students are literally, you know, their legacy will be what type of planet they leave for, you know, not just their children and
the future
the children
generations
down the road. There is an award-winning book called Last Child in the Woods, and it's written about something that's called nature deficit disorder. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's actually won an award from National Audubon several years ago. And the main premise is that to get someone interested in conserving something, you have to, A, make them aware of it, get them out there having these types of experiences. In general ecology, this comes to mind. I teach various techniques for estimating plant and animal populations, and it's very difficult, given the constraints of a 2 or 3 hour lab, to go out and try to band white-tailed deer or even hawks, and so early in the semester we do a mark and recapture of grasshoppers. And so what kid, well, sadly fewer and fewer, but hasn't, you know, tried to catch a dragonfly or a butterfly with a net at some point?
So they're out there doing it.
And one of the students could not have childcare, and she brought her, you know, little 5-year-old girl, and the girl was better at catching the grasshoppers than the students.
Show mom how to do it.
But in all seriousness, getting students out there to have these experiences where they're not plugged in, they're running around, they're experiencing nature. They absolutely have to have these experiences to value that when they grow into adults and pass that on to their children. When you survey hobbies in the U.S. nationally, bird watching is right up there. People feeding birds in their backyard. And gardening is right up there as well. This is a larger part of what has been referred to as the biophilia hypothesis, that humans have a biological need to interact with the natural world. And part of the reason, it's complicated, but part of the reason that we're going to face so many problems is people are not getting this need met. And so that's just another example of the value of the prairie being literally right out our back door.
That's great. Well, there's a lot of things to look forward to as the prairies continues to be developed with your programs and the University preserving it. I'd like to thank you for being on this part of the program.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I'd like to thank the viewers for joining us this week on Newsmakers as we look at the Missouri Southern Prairie. I'm Judy Stiles. I'll see you again next week at the same time on this station.